Hello everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Kickstarter Weekly. Today's episode is going to be looking at games that are completing their funding between August 15th and August 21st. Now, I've been gone for 2 weeks on my honeymoon, so I had a week with no video. The last week was actually a double video, but now I'm back in town, and these videos should continue weekly for the foreseeable future. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about 4 different crowdfunding campaigns. One of them's on Backerkit, 2 of them are on Gamefound, and only one's on Kickstarter. So if this trend continues, as I think it probably will, I may change the title of this video series to the Crowdfunding Weekly. But I probably will wait to do that until I have my new equipment, new lighting, and things like that, so that those changes can just all occur at the same time. Now, if you're new to this series, every week I take a look at the crowdfunding campaigns that I think you should be the most aware of. You can look at these videos as a last chance for you to be notified about something that may be good that you should maybe take a look at before these campaigns complete their funding. And my goal is that you really only need these videos. You don't really need to spend a lot of time looking at crowdfunding sources if you're watching these videos. Of course, that's going to be more true the more your tastes align with mine, and I tend to enjoy heavy Euros, dungeon crawlers, and storytelling games the most. I'm always looking for good lighter games, but I have a much tighter focus on those. Now, before I start talking to you about the 4 crowdfunding campaigns I'm going to be looking at today, I will first talk about the 2 games that I personally played since the last video. I was fairly busy with my honeymoon, so we only played 2 games over this last period. And after I talk to you about those crowdfunding campaigns, I then will talk to you briefly about which campaigns from the previous video I personally backed, and then finally which games I've acquired since the last video. And this week there are 3 games that I personally backed and 2 games that I've acquired. Please remember to like and subscribe. That's the best way to show your appreciation and help me to grow the channel at this point in time. And let's get started with the 2 games that I've personally played since the last video. Now, the first of these is Fantasy Realms, and I've talked about Red Rising in the past. Red Rising was put out by Stonemaier Games, and Jamie Stegmaier was very explicit about the fact that he really liked Fantasy Realms, and he was in many ways kind of reiterating Fantasy Realms with Red Rising. Now, I liked Red Rising. I thought it was okay, but I thought a lot of the additional mechanisms that they threw into that game didn't really help the game at all. It just gave extra complexity to a game that didn't really need it when we're looking at the original, at Fantasy Realms. The other thing I did not like that much about Red Rising is the fact that you had different cards and columns you could kind of choose from, different mechanics that worked with those, but I always felt when I was playing Red Rising that I was trying to stop bad things from happening. In other words, as I was assembling my decks of cards, I didn't really feel motivated by the cards that I had. I didn't feel like I had good combinations of cards and I was looking for better combinations of cards. I felt more like I didn't really have good stuff and I was trying to somehow eke out some points. Fantasy Realms plays differently in that when you're playing Fantasy Realms and you get cards, at least when I've played it, and I've played Fantasy Realms probably a dozen times now over the last few years. This most recent play was with Kristen, and it was her first time playing it, but I've played it a lot in the past. And my experience with Fantasy Realms is that I'm always in a position where the carrot is leading me rather than the stick. I always have a lot of really good things in my hand and cards that combine well with other cards. And so the choices there are more, do I want to abandon this carrot for a better carrot? And I like those choices better. It's always fun to get stuff, to get free stuff, or to get things. So trying to decide what good things you want to try to keep and what better things you might want to try for, to me, that's a more fun game-playing environment than trying to stop the punishment and get a little something to help you along the way. And that's kind of how those 2 games feel to me in comparison. But they're very similar in the fact that you're essentially just card drafting. And a lot of the cards that you're drafting have different rules, like this card will score this many points, but if you also have this card and this card, it'll score this many more points. Alternately, it might have a warning like, but if you have these other cards in your hand, having this card will negate those cards' powers. So you're drafting cards, taking turns, and you're constantly trying to balance your hand of cards to score the most points, but to not have cards in your hand that could disempower each other. Now, there is an expansion out for Fantasy Realms called the Cursed Horde. I do own that expansion. I have not played it yet because for Kristen, it was her first play of the game, and I think it's best to play it a few times so that she can get a handle on it before we throw in the expansion. But I really like Fantasy Realms. It's just a deck of cards, so you can play it fairly quickly and easily anywhere. If you're playing with 2 players, there are some variant rules, but they're not that much different, and you do need a little bit of space to lay out sort of a display of cards, up to I think 12 cards. So there's still enough room that you could play it on a plane or possibly play it outside depending on wind and things like that. Maybe if you have the cards sleeved, it'll play a little bit better because the wind would be less likely to take cards that are heavier if they're sleeved. But it is almost playable anywhere. It doesn't require a lot of table space, and it's really just a deck of cards. At the same time, there are really good decisions to be made in terms of how these cards work together. There's enough complications that there are always legitimate choices, real choices to be made. But once you've played it a couple times, it no longer feels complicated to me in a way that's problematic. I think for Kristen on her first play, she was a little bit overwhelmed just because of the language of the cards and learning that and learning the way that the cards work together. That's probably true of my experience a few years ago, the first time that I played it. But again, after playing it a couple of times, it's really smooth, it's really easy, and then you're just dealing with those decisions. Do I want to try for this card to go with this card I already have in my hand, or do I maybe want to abandon that strategy for a card that's down in the display that has other cards that work with it that are even more attractive to me as a combo? Now, if you watch some of my other videos, you know I'm not a huge fan of really light games just because oftentimes those games almost play themselves. There's not a lot of decision making in a lot of lighter games. So I'm always trying to sift through the lighter offerings out there to find games that maybe they're easy to play and easy to teach, but also offer really good decisions. And I would say this is definitely one of those games. For people who like card drafting, very simple card drafting, this is a very small footprint of a game, doesn't take up a lot of space on the shelf, easy to teach, easy to play, except for that initial download of the cards and their iconography and the way they work together. But after a play or two, I think most people will feel fairly at ease with it. So for me personally, I give Fantasy Realms an 8.5. This is a game that I'm always happy to play, and it's a fairly quick game, especially with people who know it, so it doesn't take a lot of time. It's a really good game to have, you know, before or after a game night if you're just trying to fill 10 to 20, maybe 30 minutes at the outside with something quick as you're waiting for people that still offers you the ability to feel engaged and make decisions. The other game that I played this period is called Fuji Koro. I backed it on Kickstarter when they did the deluxe version, so I have Fuji Koro Deluxe. Now, this is a game that can be played competitively, it can be played cooperatively, but thematically what's happening is that your characters are various samurai, and you're in Japan around this volcano that's going to be activating as the game goes on. So the first part of the game will see characters wandering around doing movement, picking up various kinds of tokens and resources, using those things to craft gear. They'll have a helmet that they can use for armor when they're in combat. They'll have a weapon that will allow them to roll different and more kinds of dice in combat. And then they'll have sandals, which if they have a certain amount of strength to them, they'll be able to help the player cross over lava. And so they're walking around this environment, picking up these resources, and maybe fighting each other a little bit if you're playing the competitive game, or if you're playing the cooperative game, then they're going to be trying to work together to kill some of the dragons that come out over the course of the game. And in the cooperative game, you're always going to have to finish that game by fighting the big legendary dragon dragon together. In the competitive game, that dragon may or may not come out, so it's going to be more a choice of how you choose to engage with the different elements in the game, like the other players and the dragons that do come out. Well, on the one hand, the game is very simple because all you're really doing is moving and picking up things and maybe initiating combat and just kind of upgrading various things. There's also 3 different kinds of cards that you can get in the game that will also allow you to improve various abilities or to let you score endgame points. So in that sense, the game is a little bit of an engine builder, a lot of kind of resource management, and you're working towards scoring some endgame goals. Now, I think this plays in a very light and breezy way that should appeal to kind of newer gamers, but there can be a lot with the iconography, and there's also sort of a big download of information, I think, on a first play. So it appeals to, I think, lighter gamers in some way, but it still has this barrier to entry. Also, the deluxe version looks great on the table. It has these really stiff cardboard structures that you place out on the board. There's a big play mat that's double-sided, whether you're playing cooperative or competitive. There are dragon miniatures. It looks really good on the table. It has a lot of table presence. The question is there really enough strategy in the game, and are there enough choices? I know some of my heavier gamer friends don't really like Fuji Koro. They think that there aren't enough strategies really, or enough choices of impact, and I probably agree with them. I think for me then the game falls into this kind of medium area, which is that the kind of easy breeziness of the gameplay, once you're familiar with it, does appeal to those lighter gamers, but the kind of rule set and the information, the bulk of information needed to play the game, can work as a barrier to entry for those players. So it kind of exists in this middle ground where I think it's going to be a little tough to get lighter gamers into the game and wanting to play it, and I think it may not offer enough for heavier gamers. For me, that's a little bit problematic because I think on both ends I'm going to have trouble getting people to play it. Now, there is a solo mode and there are different scenarios that you can play, whether you're doing competitive, cooperative, or solo. So I think I will probably at the very least play through the different scenarios in solo mode. I'll probably see if I can get Kristen interested in playing those scenarios in cooperative mode. But I think this is going to be a hard game for me to get to the table unless I was going to go to meetups ready to teach it to lighter gamers and to really kind of perfect and streamline my teach to make it as easy as possible for those gamers to be engaged on a first play and to feel comfortable with what they're doing. I have not been going to any big meetups since the pandemic started a couple years ago. I tend to play in smaller groups, and so that again is another barrier to entry for me to get this played. I think the best scenario would be sort of a bigger meetup and to put together a group of 4 to 6 kind of medium-like gamers and for me to do a really good teach. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. So I think for now, this game is going to sit on my shelf while I get through the solo and perhaps the cooperative scenarios. And just because I anticipate difficulty getting it to the table over the long term, it may be a game that gets sold sooner rather than later. I do really enjoy it for what it is. It's pretty and it's really fun. And once you get into a groove with it, I don't want to say it plays itself because you are still making decisions, but it just plays so easily. It's very pleasant. It's a very pleasant game to play with this barrier to entry and a big setup, lots of pieces, big mat, good table presence, but again, everything kind of makes it tough to get to the table. So for me, I'm going to rate Fuji Koro Deluxe at this time a 7.0. It's a game that I enjoy. I just wish that on the one hand it was a little easier to teach, and on the other hand it had a little bit more going on. So 8.5 for Fantasy Realms, 7.0 for Fuji Koro Deluxe. And now let's talk about the 4 campaigns that are going to be completing their funding this week. We're going to kick things off with Return to Dark Tower. This is a second campaign for this game. It's on Backerkit this time around, where it had a minimum required funding goal of $400,000. They're currently at $1.7 million, which is about 4 times that minimum required funding goal. The campaign will complete its funding on Tuesday, August the 16th. This is a game for 1 to 4 players that plays in about 100 to 120 minutes. Complexity on the game is medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium low. Now, I had the original game back in the 80s. I didn't have a lot of kind of hobby board games back at that time. I played kind of the regular board games, but I had a friend who was from Ukraine. His family was filled with engineers, and at some point I went over to his house and played the original Dark Tower, fell in love with it, thought it was amazing, and ended up getting my own copy. And that game was essentially a race where you had to go around the board, and there was this big mechanical tower in the middle of the board where you'd kind of punch in your encounters and things, what you were doing, and it would make all these beeping sounds and spin around. There was a lot of randomization in that game, so you wouldn't necessarily know when you went into a battle how big a force you were going to fight. And things even in that battle were randomized. So you could be fighting a lot of brigands, let's say, more than your forces, but you could get lucky and start to really whittle them down. But you'd have to watch how the fight was going every round. And if things really started to turn against you, you could press a cancel button and you'd sort of retreat out of the battle and lose a certain percentage of your forces. But you at least wouldn't be stuck in this battle where they would be completely depleted. So you'd be racing around this board and encountering forces that you would fight, and you'd visit different structures that would allow you to get more resources and kind of heal yourself up. At the end, when you completed your way around the board, you'd have to fight a big bad who was also random for the game, chosen from a few different monsters. And so you'd be, over the course of the game, trying to build yourself up to be able to fight that big bad. There was a lot of randomization in the game, but in the 80s, I don't think we cared so much. We thought it was still cool to be playing it. But my question was, when the original campaign came out, is how well is this going to translate, to current gaming, where this is the kind of game I think you're going to have heavier Euro gamers involved in it. It's got a big price tag on it. And is it going to have a lot of randomization that will make the types of gamers who may be playing it not want to play it? Also, there's the fact that the new version is sort of app dependent and technology dependent, and I try to stay away from those kinds of games personally because I don't want a few years to go by and then the app or the program that the game depends on to be, moded out if the game doesn't really do that well, and then you're kind of left with an unplayable game. But it has had fairly good reviews, and they seem to be doing well in the technology end of things. So it's got a reprinting, and it's something that at least I am now looking more seriously at. I do have some nostalgia involved. I did like the original game, but I know that this game is not really going to pay off on all of that nostalgia, and it has a lot of differences in it as well. So I'm curious to see how it plays compared to the original, but I don't have any illusions that it's going to be exactly the same kind of game or that it's going to, kind of fulfill on that nostalgia completely. I am trying to look at it more now as its own thing. So it's a cooperative game, and as you play it, you're going to be doing things to bulk up yourself, get more advantages, which will bring in variable player powers. There's a little bit of engine building involved. There's also a cube tower where you're going to be placing these skulls into the big tower at the end of your turn. That's different from the original game. There's more technology and things happening with this tower than in the original one. I know you can play it cooperatively or competitively, and I also know that it can be sort of scenario mission campaign based, but I think if we're looking at how to describe the game in one phrase, I think it has to be digital hybrid, just for its reliance on the app and the technology. I think that's the thing that people really need to understand and be aware of going into this one. So this is a second printing and another chance for people who, maybe like me, didn't jump on it the first time around for many different kinds of reservations, or maybe you just didn't know about it, or you were waiting to hear how it landed and how people liked it. So this is a second chance. It's a reprinting. There's also a new expansion being offered through this campaign, though. It's called Covenant. So for backers of the first campaign who've received it, are enjoying it, and really like it and want more, this is your opportunity to get the new expansion called Covenant. There are 5 different designers on this one. Isaac Childress has worked on Forge War, Gloomhaven, and Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. Noah Cohen has worked on Betrayal Legacy, Unmatched Battle of Legends Volume 2, and Unmatched Little Red Riding Hood vs. Beowulf. Rob Daviow has worked on Cthulhu Death May Die, Pandemic Legacy Seasons 0, 1, and 2, and Unmatched Cobble and Fog. Justin D. Jacobson has worked on Downforce, Unmatched Battle of Legends Volume 1, Unmatched Cobble vs. Fog, and Unmatched Robin Hood vs. Bigfoot. And Brian Neff has worked on Betrayal Legacy, Unmatched Battle of Legends Volume 2, and Unmatched Little Red Riding Hood vs. Beowulf. There are 9 different artists on this new expansion. Some of them have other credits, some of them don't. JJ Ariosa has previously worked on Evolution, Mice and Mystics, Role Player, Summoner Wars, and Summoner Wars Master Set. James Buscema, Eric Ela, Garrett Kaida, who's previously worked on Football Highlights 2052, Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition, and Unmatched Battle of Legends Volume 1. Christina Kalida, Nastia Lane, who's previously worked on Gates of Mara, Last Bastion, and Quetzal. Martin Muttat, who's previously worked on The Magnificent, Unlock Exotic Adventures, Scheherazad's Last Tale, and Vampire the Masquerade Vendetta. Brian Patterson, who's previously worked on Chimera Station, Gloom of Thrones, and Kaiju Incorporated. And Eleanor Patera. Finally, the game is being published by Restoration Games. They're best known for Downforce, Unmatched Battle of Legends Volume 1, Unmatched Cobble vs. Fog, Unmatched Jurassic Park InGen vs. Raptors, and Unmatched Robin Hood vs. Bigfoot. Restoration Games tends to do 2 things in general. They bring back older games. They've done that with Fireball Island. They've done that with Dark Tower, several other games. And they have the very successful Unmatched series, which is sort of a miniatures combat system that uses deck building. There are 4 pledges for this one. The first is for $55. It's called Covenant, and that's going to be just for the new expansion. So that is for people who already own the game. They just want the new expansion, and that's going to include a lot of new cards to give you more variability and a new kind of big quest, so that as you're playing the game, you're trying to do something different. You're trying to achieve something different. For $75, you can pledge Covenant Deluxe. That will get you the same new expansion, but you'll also get Coffers 2, which is a token upgrade pack, as well as a Covenant Sleeves pack to sleeve all the cards in the new expansion. For $150, you can pledge Charge the Tower, which is going to get you the base game, the new second printing of the base game. Finally, for $299, you can pledge As Call's Bounty. That's going to sort of combine those 2 things. So you'll get the new version of the base game. You'll also get Covenant. You will get the Coffers 2 upgraded bits. You'll also get the Coffers 1 upgraded bits from the original campaign. You'll get, of course, the new expansion Covenant, and you'll get the previous 2 expansions that were offered through the original campaign, Alliances and Dark Horde. What you won't be getting in that pledge is sleeves of any kind. So if you still want sleeves, you'll need to add those on. Let's talk about add-ons. For $40, you can get the second printing of the neoprene board. In fact, for all of these items that are being offered for a second go-round, this is going to be the second production or second printing for these items. For $20, you can get campaign sleeves. That should be everything that you need for all of the sleeves from the original campaign. And then you can add on Covenant sleeves for the new expansion for $7. If you want Coffers 1, which is the upgraded bits from the original campaign, that's available as an add-on for $25. Coffers 2 is also available as an add-on for $25, and both of those add-ons are plastic pieces that replace some of the cardboard pieces that are otherwise what you'd be using if you were not pledging for the extra bits. The Covenant expansion as an add-on is $55. The Alliances expansion, if you want to get that as an add-on, is $35, and The Dark Horde expansion as an add-on is $70. So, if you're piecemealing certain things together and you don't want to get that Askol's bounty, you can pick and choose your expansions, and those would be the prices that you would pay as add-ons. Finally, you can add on an additional Skulls pack for $5. The Skulls are the things that you're going to be putting in the tower at the end of every turn. Shipping for the continental US is being estimated at $22, $30, and $60. So $22 is for the new expansion, whether or not you're getting the non-deluxe version or the deluxe version. $30 is what you'll be paying if you're getting the second printing of the base game, just the Charge the Tower, and $60 is the shipping estimate if you're getting Askol's bounty with most of the things. Keep in mind that's not going to include sleeves or the neoprene playmat, so if you want those things, you'll have to add them on as well. It's possible that could increase your shipping a little bit more than the $60 for the Askol's bounty pledge. Finally, Restoration Games is planning on delivering Return to Dark Tower, both the second printing and the new Covenant expansion, in July of 2023. From there, we leave Backerkit to go over to Gamefound for a game called Bloodstones. This one had a $35,000 minimum required funding goal. They're currently at $145,000, which is about 4 times that minimum required funding goal. Bloodstones is going to complete its funding on Wednesday, August the 17th. This is a game for 1 to 6 players that plays in about 1 to 3 hours. It has a complexity level of medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at high. Now, this is essentially a war game, much like something like Game of Thrones, the board game. It uses things like area majority and tile placement. Bloodstones has been designed by Martin Wallace. He's best known for games like Age of Steam, Brass Birmingham, Brass Lancashire, Railways of the World, and the original Steam. And it's got art by 2 artists, Atticus McNaughton and Lee Walton. Lee Walton previously worked on a game called Rare Roses. Finally, the game is being published by Wallace Designs, and that's the reason for the high risk. While the game has been designed by Martin Wallace, who's a very well-known designer, this is the first publication for his new company, Wallace Designs. So it's the first game that they've produced. It's also the first Kickstarter that they've run. On the one hand, there is a well-known designer behind this. On the other hand, it's sort of a first for this new publishing entity. Now, unlike Return to Dark Tower, there are not a lot of pledges on this one. There aren't a lot of add-ons. There is 1 pledge and no add-ons. So for $76, you can pledge 1 copy, and then shipping in the continental US is being estimated at $15. That means your total cost, if you're pledging this, is going to be $91, and that's everything all included, no add-ons available. And just as with Return to Dark Tower, Wallace Designs is planning on delivering Bloodstones in July of 2023. From there, we go over to Kickstarter for a game called Dead Reckoning Letter of Marque. That's the newest expansion. They had a minimum required funding goal for this campaign of $50,000. They're currently at $400,000, which is about 8 times that minimum required funding goal. Dead Reckoning Letters of Marque is going to complete its campaign on Friday, August the 19th. This is a game for 1 to 4 players that plays in about 1.5 to 2.5 hours. Complexity on the game is heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at low. Now, this game is from John D. Clare. I think a lot of people have at least heard of Mystic Vale. He also made a game called Edge of Darkness, and both of those games used a card crafting system where you are taking different cards and putting them into a sleeve together and making more powerful cards. So some of the cards will have things on the top section or the middle or the bottom, and then how you layer these cards within a sleeve. It's deck building, but it's deck building that's being done not just adding cards, but crafting cards together. There's a similar card crafting mechanic used in a game called Canvas that's a much lighter game focused on creating paintings and things like that. Mystic Vale was fantasy themed. It was the first game to be published of John's that's like this. However, he actually created a game called Edge of Darkness first. That game was published second. They kind of did Mystic Vale first because it was a simpler game, so they wanted to see how that system would land. It did well, people loved it. They published Edge of Darkness, and then now they've published Dead Reckoning, which is pirate themed. And this one's been fairly well received. People seem to like this one, I think more than Edge of Darkness. So if we have to look at a genre to kind of put a name on this, it's going to be deck building. There's also layering. And again, designed by John D. Clare. He's probably best known for Cubitos, Dead Reckoning, the base game, Eco's First Continent, Mystic Vale, and Space Base. And the art on this new expansion, Letters of Marque, is by Ian O'Toole, who also did the art on the base game. He's also the artist who does most of the Vital Lacerda games. So he's worked on The Gallerist, Kanban EV, Lisboa, On Mars, and Venus Deluxe Edition. Dead Reckoning is published by Alderac Entertainment Group. Sometimes it's better known as AEG. They're best known for Calico, Cascadia, Istanbul, Space Base, and War Chest. Now there are 3 different pledge levels on this one, so you can either get just the new stuff, or maybe you missed Dead Reckoning the first time around and you need to pick it up here. You can do that. And there's also a lot of different add-ons, so you can kind of pick and choose which things you want if you don't want everything from the first campaign. For $59, you can pledge Letters of Marque. That's going to get you the new items. Part of that is Saga 3. It's called Changing Times, and that's going to give you a new storytelling saga. The original campaign came with the base game and 2 sagas, so this is the 3rd one. There's also new different cards, different components, new Sea Dogs, so you can play with different new characters. There's some things in there to give you more variability in the game, as well as this new saga. And finally, there is an upgrade kit from the first version of the game, just to upgrade some items that will be upgraded from now on in the second printing. For $79, you can choose the pledge deckhand. That will get you the new printing of the base game. Won't get you any of the new stuff except for the new Sea Dogs. So those are just characters that you'll be able to use with the base game. You can still use them, you just won't have the new saga, the new stuff. You'll have those new Sea Dogs, which can be used playing just with the base game. Finally, for $239, you can pledge Captain of the High Seas. That's going to combine those 2 pledges. So you'll get the base game, you'll get all of the new stuff, plus you will get Saga 1 and Saga 2. You'll also get the original Sea Dogs, so the original extra characters that were offered, I believe is stretch goals through the first campaign. However, there are a few things that aren't included in any of these pledges, like the metal coins or the upgraded cargo. So there's a bunch of add-ons. Let's talk about those. For $45, you can add on Saga 1 called Deep Legends as an add-on. For $45, you can also add on Saga 2, Salt and Thunder, also as an add-on. And then if you're wanting Saga 3, like another copy of it maybe you're pledging the second level for the base game, but you want to get Saga 3 as well, that's going to be $59 as an add-on. If you don't have the original Sea Dogs from the first campaign, you can also get those as an add-on. They are $25 for Sea Dogs Pack 1. For $15, you can add on custom sleeves. For $30, you can add on upgraded cargo. So there are cargo resources in the game. They are barrels and crates, and if you get the upgraded cargo, they're kind of painted resin markers. They have a nice weight to them. They look really nice, kind of like Stonemeyer's realistic resources. Also, for $40, you can add on metal coins. For $20, you can add on a neoprene playmat, and I believe that this is the first time this is being offered. So even if you backed it the first time around and you got everything that was available at that time, you will not yet have the neoprene playmat. You will also not yet have the 3D upgraded buildings. Again, that's the first time that these are being offered, and they will be available here as an add-on for $30, upgraded buildings. Shipping in the continental US has been estimated at $14, $16, and $22. Each of those amounts aligns with one of the 3 pledges, and then AEG is planning on delivering this new Dead Reckoning campaign in August of 2023. From there, we go back to Gamefound for a game called Utopia. Now, this game had a minimum required funding goal of $30,000. They're currently at $26,000, so they haven't hit that total yet. They're at 86%, or 0.86 of their minimum required funding goal. Now, I've spoken about this before, but typically, crowdfunding campaigns for board games will do 2/3 of their business in the first 48 hours and 1/3 of their business in the last 24 hours. The only time that doesn't happen usually is if the creator pulls the plug before the end. Because they are 86% of the way there, they should easily go over their funding goal in that last 24 hours. The question is, will they do that? Sometimes companies are looking at the way that the campaigns run, and if they're only barely going to make that goal, they'll cancel their campaign and they'll relaunch later. That's actually what happened with a game that I profiled in the last video called Quad Heroes 2nd Edition. They were close to funding, and if they'd let it run, they would have funded, but I think they just weren't happy with that. So I said there's no way that this game's not going to fund unless the creators pull the plug in the last video. And then like a day or two after I posted it, that's exactly what happened. However, for people who are still interested in Quad Heroes 2nd Edition, it is going to be relaunched on September the 6th. So keep your eyes peeled for that. As far as Utopia goes, I'm not sure. This is a first-time publisher, so they may just want to get this thing funded and get one successful campaign in the bag, or they may look at this over the next week and decide to relaunch later. If you have pledged and they cancel the campaign, they will never even take your money. It's not a case of them taking the money and it being refunded. They don't normally collect your money until after the campaign succeeds. So if you've pledged and they cancel, you'll never be charged. You have nothing to worry about, which means if for some reason the publisher here decides not to complete the campaign and relaunch later, there's no worry if you're pledged. You're fine. So Utopia is also going to complete its funding on Friday, August the 19th. This is a game for 1 to 4 players that plays in about 1.5 to 2 hours. Complexity on the game is medium light, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at high because kind of like Bloodstones and Wallace Designs, this is a first-time publisher, first-time Kickstarter campaign. The difference with this one is that the designers and artists are generally new here as well. So essentially, this is a worker placement game. Players are going to be trying to complete 3 different missions. In this game, they're called butterfly effect missions because you're going to be trying to gather resources and then go back in time to change certain things. So in that sense, it's a race game. And it is a lighter game. It's largely kind of resource collection and then achieving these various cards, these various missions, but it's also a worker placement game. So I think that's our category for this one, is worker placement. It's designed by James Henchman Price with art by Radu Paul Manzanak, who previously worked on a game called Lockleavia Vengeance. And the publisher here is called Gravity Games. Now, it's not a complicated campaign. There are essentially 2 different pledge levels for you to choose from. For $73, you can pledge base all gameplay. That's going to come with the base game, and then 8 of these tokens that you can use to vary setup. If you pledge $97, which is the Deluxe all gameplay level, you're going to throw in 2 expansions with that. One of those is a 5th player expansion. It's called The Fate of Humanity, and then there's just a general expansion called Rise of the Factions. You'll also be getting 12 of those variable setup tokens instead of 8. You'll also get custom insert trays and 75 plastic knowledge discs, which are upgraded tokens. Shipping in the continental United States has been estimated at $19, and Gravity Games is planning on delivering Utopia in July of 2023. So that wraps up our 4 campaigns for the week. I hope something in there caught your eye and makes you want to look at it further. You can always go down into the description of my videos where I list the campaigns along with links to the individual campaigns. So if any of these 4 campaigns is interesting to you, you want to go look at it some more in more detail, possibly back it, you can just go down into the description and it will take you right over there. So you don't need to go and look for it yourself on Kickstarter or Backerkit or Gamefound. Now let's talk about the 3 games that I personally backed from the last video. I already mentioned that Quad Heroes 2nd edition did not complete its campaign because the publisher canceled that campaign. They will be relaunching on September 6th. So if that is a game that interested you, keep your eyes open. It'll be back very, very soon. So the 3 games that I personally pledged from the last video, the first of those was Euthia Resurrected. And this is a game that I missed the first time around. I was very upset when I found out how good the game was and the fact that when that campaign was running, I passed it over for other things. I think at the time it was because it was a big, massive undertaking, this huge story narrative game with all these miniatures by a new publisher. But the game published, reactions to it have been through the roof. It's done very well in reviews. People are loving that game. I think the last time I checked, it had like an 8.7 on BGG, which is very high. So they did a new campaign a couple months ago to bring back the game and do some new expansions for it. And the publisher, who I think was kind of already in the hole from the first printing, which often happens with newer companies, which is one of the reasons that I give them a higher risk. If it's a new company, it's the first time they've produced a game, there's so much room, especially in the post-pandemic world, for things just to go wrong. And not having experience can add to that. And if you're doing a big game with high production value and lots of miniatures, that can add to that as well. So I think Dai Games took a beating on that first campaign. They maybe didn't even break even. They were probably looking on that second campaign to really start to make some money back. And they weren't making enough money early. So they canceled the campaign, and even worse, they shuttered the entire company. A couple months later, Steamforged Games came along and decided to help them, keep them in business, and rerun their campaign a little bit more simplified through Kickstarter. So they did that. I backed it. I'm very excited to get in on it, even though I'm not a huge fan of Steamforged Games. But they're helping keep a really well-received, well-rated game in print, give it a second printing, add more new things to it, and allow more gamers to find it. So this may be my most anticipated campaign of 2022. I'm very glad that it came back for a second try and that Steamforged Games came along and decided to help Dai Games keep this thing going. I also backed Isle of Trains All Aboard, which was a much smaller footprint of a game co-designed by Seth Jaffe. It uses multi-use cards. I always like games that have multi-use cards because usually when they're well designed, and I think Seth Jaffe is a pretty good designer, it just gives you more and more choices to make as a gamer. You have so many different ways that you can use those cards, so it gives you different levels of strategy, trying to decide to use the card as this thing or this thing or this thing. It just opens up the possibilities. And it had a smaller price tag attached to it, which made it even more, I think, attractive as a back. Now, in terms of cheaper backs, the third game that I backed from the last week was for a roll and write game that is just purely PDFs. So it was only $5 to back that game. Really easy. I've heard some really good things about this roll and write, print and play, and it has a nice little campaign to it. It seems like the kind of thing that they're going to keep working on. And I like storytelling in my games, and I like roll and write games. So combining those two things for a really cheap price, it was so easy to back it at that right? It's $5. It's less than a coffee in some places. So I'm very excited to get that one to the table soon. And because it doesn't need time to deliver, I think they're unlocking the PDF files in September. So hopefully I'll be able to play it then and feature on the channel next month. So those are the three games that I personally backed from the last video. There are two games that I received. They're both Kickstarters. The first of those is the Transcontinental. It's by a designer and artist named Glenn Dresser. He had a little bit of a problem, I think, running the campaign. He seems like somebody who's maybe not as well equipped to deal with all of the problems that any campaign's going to be encountering right now in this day and age. But he got the game completed, he got it delivered, and what made me so excited about the Transcontinental is that it's a train game, but it has mechanics that are different from any train game I think I've ever seen. It's got a pick up and deliver element. You're also kind of placing tiles, and unlike most games where you've got a big map, you're building out a route, and you're doing pick up and deliver all over the map. In this game, you're just kind of going in one direction and coming back on this train, but there's tiles on either side of the track. And as you go and come back, you're going to be making choices, how far to go each turn and which tile on either side to activate. There seem to be some really good decisions in this game, but I need to get it to the table and play it for myself, and then I'll be able to talk about it from a place of more experience. But I'm very excited for that game, and I really like to back new designers when they're doing something different and when they're doing something on such a high level. And I think from what I've seen so far, we really want Glenn Dresser to be making more games. So hopefully this one will be as good as it looks, and maybe Glenn can partner with someone that can handle more of the business stuff in the future, and he can focus more on the creative, because from what I've seen so far, he seems to be very talented, and I think this is going to be a special game, but we'll see. The other package that I got delivered was Viscounts, Gates of Gold, and Keeper of Keys. That is 2 new expansions for Viscounts of the West Kingdom. I have yet to play Paladins of the West Kingdom, but I definitely prefer Viscounts to Architects. Those are the 2 games in the series that I've played. If you know Garpel Games, you probably know some of their other stuff as well, like Raiders of the North Sea, Explorers of the North Sea. For me, Viscounts is right at the top of their game list. I really, really like it. It's got sort of a unique player board with a few different mechanisms going on there. You're going around a rondel with a worker, and you've got several different kind of tracks of strategy you can pursue. So in any game, you're just trying to figure out which of those 4 strategies to lean into and sort of which ones to combine with each other. I really, really like Viscounts. I think it's a fantastic game. I think I have it rated around an 8.5. So 2 new expansions. I'm very excited for both of them and to see how they work, separately, possibly with each other. But for me, right now, anything more Viscounts is a good thing. So that wraps the video for this week. I'll be back next week with a new Kickstarter weekly video. I know I'll be looking at Foundations of Rome, and I may or may not be including Halls of Hegra, Junk Drawer, and Amygdala. The last of those is on Gamefound. So if you're wanting to check out the campaigns early, those are the 4 games that may be making the video that I know of at this point in time. Thank you very much for watching and spending some time with me. Please remember to like and subscribe. Have an excellent week. I hope to play lots of new games this week. Hopefully you'll get to play some new stuff as well. And I will see you next week with a new Kickstarter weekly. Take care, and I'll see you very, very soon.